Funding for this program was provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by annual financial support from viewers like you. Tonight, Clive James continues his look at fame in the 20th century as he examines Hollywood's golden age. Gary Cooper, Jimmy Stewart, and Henry Fonda emerge as emblems of the average American male. While on the screen, the leading women foreshadow the rise of the strong, independent female.
Romance? Listen, peace is a whole lot more to me than any romance. They're not going to get me out on that limb again, ever.
Hollywood techniques are applied to politics by dictators Benito Mussolini and Adolf Hitler, with devastating results. Caught in the glare of fame, a British monarch renounces the throne for the woman he loves. And then, the world goes to war. De Gaulle, Churchill, and Roosevelt rally their people. The warriors take center stage. Rommel, Montgomery, Patton, and MacArthur prove to be unparalleled showmen in this larger-than-life drama. The world's biggest stars pitch in as fame becomes a potent weapon in the struggle. Celebrity goes to war on Clive James' Fame in the 20th Century.
In the 1930s, to be famous in Europe was to be famous enough. Europe still looked down on America as a kind of kindergarten. Capitalism looked like a failure. The real politics were in Europe, where various competing ideologies were heading back to nationalism, forward to socialism, sideways to National Socialism. It would take a strong man to stave off chaos, a Superman. There were various Supermen available. The daddy of them all was Benito Mussolini.
Sotto la guida del Littorio, inquadrata in tutte le sue formazioni rivoluzionarie.
Mussolini had already been strutting his stuff since 1922, when he led the fascist march on Rome and found a power vacuum into which he expanded like a balloon full of hot air. Mussolini wasn't all talk. His first claim to fame was that he made the trains run on time, a feat he accomplished by beating up a few carefully chosen helpless victims. But he was almost all talk.
Questa giornata luminosa di sole e fervida di speranze è questa.
Fascism depended on appealing to the people by turning politics into a show in which they had a permanent role as extras. All they had to do was turn up on time and shout agreement. If they forgot to come in on cue, he agreed with himself. Mussolini played most of the leading characters. The Superman was a statesman. He was a horseman. He was a musical genius. He designed his own costumes. He showed a particular flair with hats. He also knew when to take his clothes off in order to display his magnificent torso. It was common knowledge that women found him irresistible, although his sexual technique was said to consist mainly of throwing them to the floor and passing over them in a shallow dive. The fascist movement was essentially a movie by Cecil B. DeMille, with the difference that this time the director was also the leading actor and gave himself all the best scenes. Though it wasn't wise to say so, there were plenty of people in Italy who guessed that Mussolini's heart was in show business. But there were a lot more people who forgave his histrionics because they thought that history was on his side. Some of them lived in other countries and were famous themselves. The Irish playwright and pundit George Bernard Shaw was a hangover from the 19th century who had achieved 20th century fame for his piercing insight.
I think, in justice to Signor Mussolini, I ought to tell you that he has a very wonderful head. He has a wonderful brow which comes down to here. But the difficulty is that he can't take it off. Now, if you watch me, I can put on that imposing look that terrifies you, the Mussolini look.
But intellectuals like Shaw weren't the only non-Italian admirers of Mussolini. There was a German politician who watched everything Mussolini did with a mixture of excitement, envy, and a conviction that he could do even better. In 1933, Adolf Hitler conquered Germany with a bigger show than Mussolini had ever dreamed of. Booked in for a long run under the title of the 1,000-Year Reich, Hitler's mega-budget spectacular was a monster musical that included the audience in its choreography. Hitler was a self-proclaimed Superman with an irresistible appeal because he persuaded his followers that they were Supermen as well. For the price of a ticket, they weren't just entertained, they were transformed. The trick was made plausible because Hitler had so successfully transformed himself. He didn't look like a Superman, but that was the point. He was up from nowhere and could have been anybody. Hitler raved on about a new race of 7-foot-tall, blue-eyed blondes with big muscles and even bigger husbands. But his own personal appearance was rendered significant only by the flopping cowlick, the dustbug moustache, and the pointed eyeballs common among people for whom anti-Semitism counts as a complex political theory. In normal circumstances, Hitler would have been just another head case, writing to the newspapers complaining that his Alsatian had been given indigestion by a passing child. But circumstances weren't normal. A weak state had left itself wide open to a bold man driven by big dreams, and one of his biggest dreams was fame. Hitler had always been interested in fame. As a semi-student in Vienna, it had been the only thing he ever studied seriously. Hanging around the public library with a liverwurst sandwich in his raincoat pocket, he sketched lighting designs that would make him look like a man of destiny. By the time he got his show on the road, he had taken on some help. Hitler was like a film star with a personal staff. In charge of Hitler's publicity was Joseph Goebbels, who was able to make sure that Hitler was always the main topic of every means of communication by threatening anyone who showed insufficient enthusiasm with lingering death. He also had the advantage of a docile client. Hitler was always ready to cooperate with the machinery of publicity. Even in his home movies, he was willing to do another take if the cameraman muffed the first one. Another prominent staff member was Rudolf Hess. Still dizzy from his privileged position as the private secretary who had been allowed to transcribe Hitler's prose masterpiece Mein Kampf as it poured from its creator's inspired lips. After the Nazis came to power, Hess got the vital job of acting as Hitler's adoring stooge. At rallies, Hess pioneered the technique later used on American television talk shows, whereby a sycophantic feedman plays dumb so that the host can act smart.
Die Partei ist Hitler! Hitler aber ist Deutschland, wie Deutschland Hitler ist! Hitler, Sieg! Sieg!
But for an artist to attract top-class advice, he must first have talent, and that was what Hitler had. He was a ham actor, but he had timing. It was his idea to enter a rally always from the rear of the auditorium, so that he appeared to emerge from among the people as the expression of their desires, the embodiment of their dreams about a better fate. And above all, he knew how to time a speech. In this department, he improved on Mussolini, whose speeches started big and stayed big, sharing the formal properties of a salami. Hitler started small. He started by not talking at all. He looked like an ordinary man faced with too big a task. In fact, he was up to the old Roman orator's trick of milking the pause. At last he was underway, but only just. All Germany held its breath.
Am 30. Januar dieses Jahres wurde die neue Regierung der National.
As the hour-long speech progressed, Hitler pretended to draw energy from the adoring crowd in the arena and the millions of enthralled listeners clustered around the radios at home. The ordinary man became a man possessed, gripped by his tremendous vision of a superior Aryan race battling against the world Jewish Bolshevik conspiracy. To the detached observer, he looked like a 6-year-old boy throwing a tantrum in tight underpants. But at the time, it was hard to remain a detached observer. Even the cleverest people thought that Hitler really must be some kind of Superman after all.
Then there came a very intelligent gentleman named Adolf Hitler, and he, knowing perfectly well that the powers would not fight, he snapped his fingers at the Treaty of Versailles. There can be no peace in the world until there is peace between England, France, Germany, Russia, the United States, and all the big powers of the West. Now, take that home and think about it, and don't be frightened anymore about the Germans.
People who knew Hitler was evil were still impressed by his success. He was supremely powerful and he was supremely famous. It was easy to combine the two things because he had the power to declare himself famous at the top of his voice.
Und wir werden in unserem Zeichen wieder siegen!
The only fully equipped American Superman was in the movies. Johnny Weissmuller was of German extraction, and if he had been raised in Germany, he would have provided Hitler with a stunning example of what the master race looked like with its clothes off. Weissmuller was raised in America and got the job of Tarzan instead. He started off as an Olympic swimmer who won so many gold medals he could stay fit just carrying them around. He had a face off the front porch of the Parthenon. Weissmuller was a natural to play the king of the jungle. In one low-budget movie after another, he fought to gain the upper hand over Tarzan's deadly enemy, the dialogue.
Tarzan. Tarzan.
Tarzan.
Jane. Tarzan. Jane. Tarzan. Jane. Tarzan. Jane. Tarzan. Jane. Tarzan. Jane. Tarzan.
This was where dreams of omnipotence belonged, in dreamland. The king of the jungle was a sportsman turned actor, and the jungle he was king of was 100 yards across at its widest point. Everybody was enchanted and nobody was fooled, not even the ape, who wasn't earning all that much less than Weissmuller. In Europe, the eyebrows of the highbrows were raised in derision at America's culture of daydreams. But there was one big advantage in confining daydreams to culture. It kept them out of politics. In America, the man in charge didn't have to be Superman. Franklin Delano Roosevelt would have been better casting in the role of Superman than any of the European dictators. But he didn't want the part. He left all that stuff to Tarzan. Roosevelt was a different sort of strongman. America was in a mess. Roosevelt's New Deal was a bold plan for rescue, and it would have been easy for him to agree when he was hailed as a savior. He preferred to present himself as an ordinary man and play the drama down. But it was still drama.
This great nation will endure as it has endured. So first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Roosevelt didn't scream or throw his right hand in the air, but he was still a showman. His common man routine was carefully rehearsed. The real Roosevelt was an aristocrat. If America had a ruling elite, he belonged to it. But he also had a revolutionary trick of talking intimately to everybody all at once. He did it through the radio, in a regular feature known as the Fireside Chat.
I am happy to speak to you from my home on a Sabbath day that has been observed in so many of your home communities as Brotherhood Day. It is a part of the spirit of Brotherhood Day, as it is a part of our American heritage to respect those differences.
Roosevelt's Fireside Chat was fundamentally different from a dictator's ranting broadcast. FDR wasn't out to establish his own superiority. He wanted the listeners to realize their importance, not his. At any rate, he made it sound as if he did. There was an element of flattery, but there was a bigger element of fraternity. One common man was speaking to all the others, as if it was only a fluke that had put him where he was.
Brought us a long way towards the goal which has been set before the nation at its very founding.
The press knew that FDR had been crippled by polio and couldn't stand up without leg braces, but they never talked about it. Even when he appeared on behalf of polio charities, the effects of the disease on him were never mentioned. This is almost all the film footage showing the extent of FDR's affliction that has ever reached the screen. FDR didn't want his condition to become an issue, and the media agreed. He was unfaithful to his almost equally famous wife, Eleanor, and that was never talked about either. 40 years later, he would never have been elected. At the time, though, a president could still afford to be fallible. It was part of his charm. In the era of the superhumans, he sounded human.
I shall always have an undying belief in the truth of Abraham Lincoln's famous words. You can fool some of the people all of the time. You can fool all of the people some of the time, but you can't fool all of the people all of the time.
Out where they say, let us be gay, I'm going Hollywood. I'll ballyhoo, things to you, I'm going Hollywood.
Radio favored the common touch. Bing Crosby's singing sounded so much easier than other people's singing that it was called crooning.
I'm gonna be dancing with the sun-kissed baby, and I'm on my way.
Actually, there was an art to the way Bing sang. The art was to conceal the effort, as if anyone could do it. The increasingly sensitive radio microphone helped him to project a voice that sounded as if it came naturally from the heart, instead of artificially from a trained larynx. It was a close-up you could hear.
Every time it rains, and it's from heaven. Don't you know each cloud contains, and it's from heaven.
His extraordinary fame was solidly based on his being an ordinary guy. If that was democracy, some people thought it was the death of high culture. As Hollywood movies spread American popular culture to the world, there were warning voices to announce that although rule by dictatorship might be terrifying, America threatened something even worse.
Animal crackers in my soup do funny things to me. They make me think my neighborhood is a big menagerie.
Shirley Temple was a tremendous talent. She could sing, dance, and she was terrifically cute, if you like the idea of a precocious infant at the center of attention. Most of the cinema audience did. They dreamed of a daughter just like her, and not just in America. The whole world wanted to know how she coped with the problems of all that fame and money. They loved her in Britain.
The Private Life of a Star, back screen with Shirley. If you listen to cynical people, you might imagine that any child who's had such success early in life couldn't possibly remain natural and unaffected. Well, judge for yourself. On the badminton court, Miss Temple has a good eye for a shuttlecock. She has the same infectious laugh, too, as in pictures. And, of course, this isn't pictures, it's play.
Oh!
If you were blind, you'd recognize this little star. Shirley's got her first car. It's a great joy, but she's only allowed to run it in the studio grounds. They're afraid of those Hollywood road hogs outside. She drives like a grown-up woman and parks the car outside the gate of her dressing room. 2 hours parking only, Shirley.
They loved her in France, a country that was theoretically resistant to American popular culture, but in fact fascinated. Wherever thoughtful people were proud of their national culture, little Shirley Temple looked like a bigger menace than any of Hitler's towering blonde stormtroopers, who also enjoyed moving rhythmically to music, but at least didn't look winsome when they did it.
I stuck my tummy like a goop when animal crackers in my soup. Oh my goodness.
In Europe, those same thoughtful people soon realized that the fate Hitler had in mind for them was even more frightening than an American culture geared to the retarded adolescent. If they were lucky, they headed for America. Famous refugees like Einstein got an early ticket. The less famous queued for visas. They were leaving terror behind them, but triviality still loomed ahead. Already famous as the incomprehensible scientist whose theories about relativity nobody understood but everybody was impressed by, Einstein now became more famous still as America's unstoppable publicity machinery turned him into the nutty professor. He was perfect casting, right down to the voice.
What do you think of prohibition, Professor? Ich trinke nicht, also ist mir das ganz gleich.
When he realized that he was stuck with the role, Einstein seemed to enjoy hamming it up. In his native Italy, the great conductor Toscanini had been described as flamboyant. In America, he was called Electric Whiskers. Toscanini had too much energy to be depressed, but other distinguished exiles, though happy to be alive, were less happy about the American way of life. Walt Disney was the symbol of all that they feared, a man made famous by a mouse.
In answering this, you might tell him that Mickey Mouse gets hundreds of requests like his each year, asking him to help somebody sell something. Mickey has so much influence throughout the world that he has to be careful what he endorses. So before he can consider lending his approval to his product, he'll have to know much more about it. Yours truly.
What does Mr.
But not even Hollywood could replace all its flesh and blood screen stars with mice. Gary Cooper was a hero for the Depression. In the silent days, the screen's leading men had acted mainly with their profiles. Cooper had one of those too, but now he talked, like a shy man made eloquent by a passion for justice.
It's like I'm out in a big boat and I see one fella in a rowboat who's tired of rowing and wants a free ride, and another fellow who's drowning. Who would you expect me to rescue, Mr. Cedar, who's just tired of rowing and wants a free ride, or those men out there who are drowning? Any 10-year-old child will give you the answer to that. All right, fellas, thank you. Sit down.
James Stewart was even shyer than Gary Cooper. Stewart took a long time to get the words out.
Holy mackerel. Hello? Oh, hello, Miss Payne. How are you?
For the man in the street with diminished job prospects and self-confidence at a low ebb, here was his representative. Jean Arthur was overcome with pity.
Yes. I'd be delighted.
Well, maybe it's like Casey says.
Henry Fonda was even shyer than James Stewart, even more passionate for justice than Gary Cooper. Though he held himself straight, he was humble at heart.
Then what, Tom? Then it don't matter. I'll be all around in the dark. I'll be everywhere, wherever you can look.
Towering even above all the other pillars of integrity was John Wayne. No film star did more to convince his own country and the world that the ideal American male said no more than he could help the helpless get justice, and was helpless himself when it came to women.
Look, Miss Dallas, you got no folks. Neither have I. And, well, maybe I'm taking a lot for granted, but I watched you with that baby, that other woman's baby. You look, well, I still got a ranch across the border. It's a nice place, a real nice place. Trees, grass, water. There's a cabin half built. Man could live there. And a woman.
The new leading men all played the shy guy. There was the occasional aggressive exception, but he had to play a psychopath. James Cagney was Stalin's favorite screen star. The only new leading man who was allowed to retain something of the old rakish glamour was Errol Flynn, and he usually had to wear costume in throwback movies that were essentially silent swashbucklers plus words.
Did I upset your plans? You've come to Nottingham once too often. When this is over, my friend, there'll be no need for me to come again.
Flynn was born in Australia and thus blessed with the physical perfection common to Australian males.
Your sword, Gisborne.
Off-screen, he took full advantage of his appeal to women and got his name into the language with the phrase, "in like Flynn." But on-screen, his line of seduction was hampered by the lines in the script.
You're a strange man.
Strange? Because I can feel for beaten, helpless people.
No, you're strange because you want to do something about it. You're willing to defy Sir Guy, even Prince John himself, to risk your own life. And one of those men was a Norman.
Norman or Saxon? What's that matter? It's injustice I hate, not the Normans.
But it's lost you your rank, your lands. It's made you a hunted outlaw when you might have lived in comfort and security. What's your reward for all this?
Reward? Just don't understand, do you?
Welcome to Sherwood, my lady.
The long-thighed and devilishly handsome Flynn was lost without his tights. Put him in a suit and he was gone. Put Clark Gable in a suit and he actually gained in authority. Gable was the ordinary man made majestic, except there was nothing threatening about him. He had the same ears problem as Bing Crosby and couldn't sing to make you forget it. He looked almost as weird with the moustache as he did without it. Some said because an ill-fitting set of false teeth had overdeveloped the muscles in his top lip. But it all added up to masculinity, especially in those Mussolini moments when he took the suit off.
No, I have a method all my own. If you'll notice, the coat came first, then the tie, then the shirt. Now, according to Hoyle, after that, the pants should be next.
Gable was the ideal of the butch yet sensitive man in the street, a hero who could be safely worshipped without anyone getting the idea that a Superman was leading little girls astray.
Mr. Gable, writing this to you, and I hope that you will read it so you'll know. My heart beats like a hammer, and I stutter and I stammer.
The little girl in Broadway Melody of 1938, who hailed Gable as the King of Hollywood, was its new princess, Judy Garland. Divinely talented, she was desperately short of self-esteem, but the public loved her. She was all energy and no mystery. She was all American. The European femme fatale was on her way out. Greta Garbo picked her moment and went out in style. Hollywood was full of sophisticated European exiles who knew how to put together, just for her, a movie that sighed for the lost past and feared for the looming future, while she shimmered in the middle of it like a dream at the bittersweet moment just before waking. A dream called Ninotchka.
Can I make a speech now?
Please.
Comrades, people of the world, the revolution is on the march. I know, bombs will fall, civilization will crumble, but not yet, please. Wait, what's the hurry? Give us our moment. Let's be happy. We're happy, aren't we, Leo?
Yes, darling.
So happy and so tired. Oh.
Garbo quit while she was ahead. She went into self-imposed permanent obscurity with the media chasing her. They chased her all over the planet. She never told them a thing. The most famous woman in the world had never conceded that fame imposed duties. During her career, she never answered a fan letter, and after it was over, she never answered a question. 20th century fame was an American idea, and in America, private life was public property. Garbo was a European, and she disagreed. Her day in the sun was over, but it was her business what happened at night. The European women of mystery had been marginalized by the American women of the people. At the start of her career, Joan Crawford didn't look like one of those. They made her up to look like Garbo. But Crawford emerged as a woman who fought for her own identity. She was a pro. She put strength on screen. Though she was torn apart by passion, you could see the steely resolve of the future director of the Pepsi-Cola Corporation.
Say, listen. I've worked too hard to land this meal ticket to make any false moves now. Romance? Listen, peace is a whole lot more to me than any romance. They're not going to get me out on that limb again, ever.
Crawford was strong, and Betty Davis was stronger. Here was a woman ready to fight for her rights to the last bullet. Davis was as strong off-screen as on. In real life, she committed a crime which in Hollywood's eyes was worse than murder. She told the studio where it could put its bad scripts. The studio put her on suspension. She fought them in the courts. The world heard about her independent spirit. If Betty Davis had a point to make, it was hard to miss.
You fool. You cowardly, hysterical fool.
These strong women looked more like strong men than the men did. In a new genre called screwball comedy, the shy American hero could only stutter helplessly while some triumphant goddess such as Katharine Hepburn ran rings around him.
You know why you're following me? You're a fixation.
Oh, I'm not following you. I've been sitting here. I haven't moved from this spot. Now, please, you're following me.
Oh, don't be absurd. Who's always behind whom?
Yeah. Now, look, my dear young lady, I haven't been behind anything but what they call the 8-ball. I haven't been all day.
You're angry, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
Mm-hmm. The love impulse in man frequently reveals itself in terms of conflict.
Excuse me, the what impulse?
Love impulse. Yeah. Now, you see, the trouble with you is that you have a kind of...
Look, all I'm
For the sophisticated onlooker, the worrying aspect about America's ordinary guy hero with integrity was that he always looked bewildered, as if his brain was his least developed muscle. Cary Grant was highly intelligent in real life, with a sure grasp of how to manage his fame. He made sure to mix in a few starring roles as a man of action. In Only Angels Have Wings, he conquered the sky over the Andes and dominated the up-and-coming Rita Hayworth.
You're no good, Judy, and you never were. Here, give me that thing. Give me that before you cut your hand. You know, I used to wonder if I was right when we broke up. Well, I don't have to worry about it anymore.
What did I do?
You don't know what I'm talking about, do you? Well, you've got some listening to do, and I'm going to make sure you hear every word of it.
Oh, shut
Grant was playing the Hemingway hero, the hero who showed grace under pressure and distrusted too much thinking. Hemingway himself was a Hemingway hero. By now, he was the most famous writer of the century, but it was for everything except writing. He caught at least one each of every big fish in the sea. He wrote articles about it. He killed at least one each of every animal in Africa. He wrote a book about it. In Spain, he joined the local population in the traditional task of making a bull's life even more miserable than it might have been otherwise. He wrote a book about it. He used simple sentences. He said the simple life of the instincts was better than too much thought. Hemingway attended the Spanish Civil War as if that were a bullfight too. He wrote a novel about it. He used simple sentences. The hero was a man who was simple and brave. Orson Welles was the baby genius of the American theater, his name known to all who cared for the arts. As a radio star, Orson Welles became known to many who didn't care for the arts at all, but liked to be startled. He startled them too much with his dramatization of the War of the Worlds.
We interrupt this program to bring you a news bulletin. High government sources have ceased to deny the presence in many parts of the country of non-terrestrial objects.
Another bulletin, ladies and gentlemen. The latest word on the monsters from outer space.
Correction, from Mars. Sorry, folks, that's what experts are saying. They are Martians.
Wells forgot to say that the flying saucers from Mars were only fiction. A large part of the audience at home panicked. They didn't want to know about wars in some outlandish place like Europe, but flying saucers landing in New Jersey was something else. There were cases of heart failure, and someone drove off a bridge. The enfant terrible backpedaled, saying he never meant for anyone to be fooled.
Extremely surprised to learn that a story which has become familiar to children through the medium of comic strips and many succeeding novels and adventure stories should have had such an immediate and profound effect upon radio listeners.
Almost as daunting as the public's gullibility was the way the boy genius submitted to its judgment. It looked like the price of democracy. Even the British royal family found that aloofness was hard to maintain, faced with a press working on the assumption that all famous people were created equal. The Prince of Wales was already world famous, even though his accomplishments did not add up to much more than the successful wearing of clothes. But now he passed into legend. An American woman had crossed the Atlantic like a female lone eagle in search of prey. The British government tried to keep the big story quiet, but in the new world of international publicity, the American press decided the issue.
The British Empire faces an extraordinary crisis. Not for centuries have these Houses of Parliament witnessed so dangerous a political struggle. Shall King Edward VIII marry Mrs. Simpson? No, say the ministers of the cabinet supported by the Church of England and the upper classes. They are bitter in opposition to the king marrying the American woman twice divorced. The king holds that marriage is his own private affair, and he's strong-willed and determined. The ministers hold that marriage of the king and possible choice of a queen is of public and imperial importance. The logic of the clash suggests the resignation of the cabinet, the abdication of the king. The storm center in the British imperial crisis.
The Prince of Wales was all too briefly King Edward VIII before he quit crownless.
But you must believe me when I tell you that I have found it impossible to carry the heavy burden of responsibility and to discharge my duties as king as I would wish to do, without the help and support of the woman I love.
He passed into legend and passed out the other side as the Duke of Windsor. He had put the role of the monarchy into question, but there was no question about his own role. He was an ex-monarch, self-condemned to an anticlimactic après career as an international house guest. One of the Windsor's first hosts was Hitler, for whom their admiration was unbounded. Hitler was delighted. Out-of-work kings were turning up to tell him he was marvelous. Here was further evidence that only the Superman could cut the mustard in the New World Order. Britain's famous ex-Prime Minister Lloyd George, no mean seducer of the masses himself, dropped in for a drink. Hitler was in the position of a star actor who has too many famous people infesting his dressing room to shower him with praise. Nobody in history had had this much publicity before, and he started to believe it. He was infallible. If a fact contradicted his prejudices, it was the fact's fault. The black American athlete Jesse Owens won 4 gold medals at the Berlin Olympics. Hitler was present, but failed to conclude that his theory about inferior races might have something wrong with it. Hitler went home early and listened to his new set of Siegfried 78s. Later on, the black American world heavyweight boxing champion, Joe Louis, beat the Aryan ears off the racially pure German hope, Max Schmeling. Americans of whatever color were proud of their world champion, but Hitler didn't get it. He thought the Americans were so far gone, they needed a subspecies to do their fighting for them. Hitler was confident that America was a decadent culture and would do nothing while he cleaned up the even more decadent Europeans. He was vague about his next career move after that, but a strong hint was provided by what he told his mistress, Eva Braun. Hitler promised her that one day he would make her the biggest star in Hollywood. At his hidey hole in Bavaria, she dressed up to demonstrate her histrionic talents in miles of home movies. The results suggested that Adolf and Eva were a great screwball comedy team in the making. Hitler seemed infallible, and at that time, the look of the thing was everything. Fame was persuasive. A leader's image went unquestioned, even if he had manufactured it himself. If it had been wished upon him by the accident of his personal appearance, it was even more likely to be taken for reality.
People must be strong and healthy. If they should fall victim to accident or disease, they must have the best that is available of medical science.
Neville Chamberlain was Prime Minister of Britain. It wasn't his fault that he looked like a walrus in search of a mate. In reality, he was an able administrator whose bitter experience of the First World War had made him passionately committed to avoiding a second. But he didn't sound passionate. He sounded as if he vaguely hoped that his keeper might throw him a fish.
They should be able to cultivate taste for beautiful things, whether in nature or in art, and to open their minds to the wisdom that is to be found in books.
Too much of a gentleman to realize that Hitler wasn't, Chamberlain pursued an appeasement policy based on the fatal notion that Hitler's promises meant something. Chamberlain's most famous moment came after the Munich conference, when he flew home with Hitler's signature on a peace note that might as well have been a dinner menu.
This morning, I had another talk with the German Chancellor, Herr Hitler. And here is the paper which bears his name upon it as well as mine.
Joseph Stalin had already killed so many innocent people that not even Hitler would ever catch up. But Stalin was the most famous man in the Soviet Union, a title for which he had no competition apart from Lenin, who was safely dead. Through his monopoly of publicity, Stalin hailed himself as a political, artistic, and military genius, fountain of all wisdom and father of his people. His people were in no position to disagree. More remarkable was that people abroad agreed too.
Hello, all you dear boobs who have been saying for a month past that I have gone dotty about Russia.
Shaw went on for some years to point out that Stalin was a genius. Men with a low opinion of mankind tended to have a high opinion of each other. Hitler and Mussolini were a mutual admiration society, like two film stars basking in each other's glory, talking about making a movie together. Hey, let's do it. I'll tell my people to contact your people. The supporting program was over and the main feature commenced, World War II. Hitler and Stalin having privately agreed to carve up Poland between them, the Nazis headed east. Hitler found it all so easy, he could only put it down to his own genius. When he headed west, it was even easier. France fell to him in a few weeks. He couldn't put a foot wrong. The military onslaught turned into a PR operation, the aggressive marketing of Hitler's image. When Hitler came back to Berlin, he was greeted as the new Lindbergh, the new Siegfried, the new Thor. Hitler was the name above the title, the unquestioned star. It was his war. It wouldn't have happened without him. All the other supermen took their lead from him. He acted, they reacted. He was the most famous man on earth. His fame had changed reality. But fame changes reality, even for those who possess it. The self-assertion that brings success needs judgment to stay successful, but success erodes judgment. Hitler had convinced himself that all those other people were just a mass, and only he really existed. He was alone with destiny, and it was telling him what to do. The evidence was before his eyes. He had started to forget that he was the author of the show that was carrying him away. It failed to occur to him that there might be a more experienced showman with a better script.
I have never promised anything but blood, tears, toil, and sweat.
Clive James' Fame in the 20th Century will continue in a moment.
You don't have to be a rocket scientist. You don't have to be a biologist, an astronomer, an ornithologist, or an oceanographer to explore the secrets and mysteries of your world.
You are going to be a very happy person.
All we can say now is, wow.
Nobody brings science to life like public television.
On the next Clive James' Fame in the 20th Century, television creates fame. Lucille Ball, Liberace. Hollywood reacts with bigger screens and sultry stars. John Kennedy in triumph and tragedy. The Beatles make waves on both sides of the Atlantic. Revisit the 60s and see the greatest cast ever assembled on episode 3 of Clive James' Fame in the 20th Century.
Watch Clive James' Fame in the 20th Century tomorrow night.
You gonna get an idea?
Every day in big cities and small towns, you'll find public television working behind the scenes on many kinds of programs.
And we agree with your recommendation for the wheelchair ramp.
Good. We think it's more a design element and less a retrofit.
Programs that benefit your children, your neighbors, and your community. Programs that help some get ahead.
Face first into the mud.
Programs that help others catch up.
Hey, who's TV, man?
In fact, we think some of our best programs are the ones you never see on television.
This is KPBS San Diego.